Okay, time for a music review, and I'm going to review the debut album by Fairport Convention, and it was released in 1968. Wow, that's a long time ago, isn't it? Quickly, the musicians on this album: Judy Dyble on lead vocals, electric and acoustic auto harps. Iain Matthews, actually we referred to him as Iain Matthews. Don't know why. Lead vocals. Richard Thompson on vocals, lead electric and acoustic guitars and mandolin. Simon Nicol on vocals and electric 12 and 6 string guitars plus acoustic guitars. Hutchings on bass guitar and double bass and jug, and Martin Lamble on percussion and violin. This band were formed in London, and they were simply a breath of fresh air. They were always performing live, unlike many of their counterparts across the pond, and although there were some similarities with the Byrds, particularly some of the early jangly guitar styles, it has to be said that Thompson was a much more aggressive player, and also he could play very quickly indeed, and it was quite evident right from the get-go that we were looking at a tremendous lead guitar player. They came from the British folk influence stable, but Thompson was also quite into the early rock and roll, particularly Gene Vincent and Elvis Presley. There was also a tinge of the American singer-songwriter in their repertoire. That tradition was certainly part of their makeup. And of course, they also magpied a little from the psychedelic scene in San Francisco. 2 songs written by Joni Mitchell turned up on this debut album as well. One point, it's worth mentioning that this first album, the writing was shared among the band's members. 5 were accredited to Thompson and 4 to Ashley Hutchings and 1 to Simon Nicol. A very diverse band of talent for sure. So I'm now going to go into their album track by track. Track 1 then, Time Will Show the Wiser. Well, it starts off at a furious pace and really quite a dynamic sort of rhythm. Lots going on here, an amalgam of noise really which fits together, and it has a big impression on the listener, how tight the rhythm section is, and that enabled Thompson to get into some early finger picking on the guitar. It's high energy stuff for sure, with the vocals frantic, but certainly it's got a gutsy sound. I'd say it was a fine start to this album. It laid the benefit, of course, for the rest of the album. A bit lacking in production, but of course it's 1968. So comparing it with today is probably a bit unfair. It's a bit rough and ready, but the energy is absolutely first class. Track 2 then is a Joni Mitchell written song. It's called I Don't Know Where I Stand. It's a lovely little folk soft rock number with some neat female vocals from Judy Dyble, and there's a nice melody throughout from Thompson on guitar, and little snippets of lead reminiscent, it has to be said, of the music that was coming out of the Buffalo Springfield and the Byrds. That staple diet that America was on the end of. It's beautifully played, a beautiful song, and it's called I Don't Know Where I Stand. To track 3 then, the delightful If is up next, and it's a little bit of a stomp in the style of perhaps an Irish jig band. The music, although there are certain nods to the American band Loving Spoonful as well on it, and it's a real fun-loving sing-along style. You could imagine being in a bar, sipping some Irish whiskey or Irish ale and listening to this. There's once again some marvellous little snippets of almost country-style guitar picking from Thompson, who's an absolute dream on this track 3. Well, it's becoming already very much an eclectic mix, as you can probably gather, of styles of music that actually caused some criticism from music fans and music critics. Although refreshing, they suggested that the band was probably a bit much too like a jack of all trades and master of none. I'd counter that by saying that the variety was the thing that made them so original. So let's move on to track 4, a lovely mellow folk song called Cameron, with Judy on vocals. And she comes to the fore on this track. It's got a medieval folk feel to it, and the guitars, both acoustic and electric, mix tastefully, and it's very mood driven. A beautiful piece of music. To track 5, and I really like this one. It's called Jack of Diamonds. It's written by Bob Dylan. It's an arousing sort of rocky pop style, and there's some really weird recorder solo in the middle, and the vocals are more than a nod to Roger McGuinn from the Byrds. A rousing sort of few minutes, and it's probably one of the heavier tracks on this set. I wouldn't describe it as heavy rock at all, but again, it emphasises that mix amidst the styles. Another critic described it as airplane-style acid pop, a reference to Jefferson Airplane. Well, there's certainly a nod to it, the San Francisco scene, but I wouldn't overdo it. Track 6 is Portfolio. It's an instrumental, and it's driven largely by piano, but the piano almost has a sort of jazz feel to it, sort of jazz psychedelic, really, in nature. A very strange piece of music, but very interesting. I'm not quite sure what it all means. The piano is very much the centre of this piece, but a very unusual instrumental. And then moving on to track 7, the second Joni Mitchell song, Chelsea Morning, and it's pretty delightful, really. The vocals of Judy Dyble come to the fore again. And Matthews also is prevalent, and in places it sounds very not too dissimilar to Joni herself. A rhythmic piece of excellence with nods to some jazz arrangements. I find the whole song impressive, and it's got a lovely melody. Next up is Sunshades. It's possibly the standout track on this album. It's got a lovely mood to it, almost a gentle samba style, sort of Pacific Coast rhythms with genteel vocals. And there's some delicate guitars, both acoustic and electric, that remind one of the guitar work on some of Stevie Wonder's classic albums. You know, just dabbling in it a little, but creating that sort of hot, summery feel of love. It's really nice stuff. 1968, and it's an absolute 5-star. Track 9 is Lobster. It starts out with the first few minutes of jag psychedelic experimentation, sort of West Coast again, and then Matthews' vocals arrive, and it develops into a march-like regimental sound. Rock style, of course, but very, very eclectic. Okay, track 10. It's All Right Ma, It's Only Witchcraft. Strange sort of title. It's a rocky blues, really very reflective of music being put together by the Yardbirds at the time, and to a lesser extent John Mayall. It's a completely different sort of direction from the previous tracks, and one almost would suggest that Thompson is mimicking a Jimmy Page. Got so much talent, this man. So to track 11, One Sure Thing. Tends to bring the folk album back almost full circle to a traditional folk rock bag, with some gentle lead by Judy, a nice rhythm guitar, and a touch of the lead solos again, just to wrap it up nicely. It's got a trademark Thompson lead guitar solo, one that will be continued to hear throughout his career as he blossomed as a solo artist. But you can see where it's coming from, very distinctive. It builds up atmospherically, and some of the styles that the Doors were offering, used particularly with that bombastic type of slow blues style. Really pleasant stuff. So we round things off then with M1 Breakdown. M1, if you're not familiar, was the first motorway constructed in the UK from London heading up to the Midlands. Anyway, It reminds me of the roots of folk traditional. There's their beginnings, and I think there's a Jew's harp in there, possibly a touch of fiddle as well. And it's all sort of hints of a knees up, very Irish style drinking bar. But it completes a sort of wonderful collection of varied styles for a band that were thought of very, very highly. The Fairport Convention, then, they made some cracking albums after this, and I'll try and get round to reviewing them. They had a few singers, both female and male, until they broke up in the early 70s. This is a wonderful introduction to the music of them, Fairport Convention, and particularly the music of one Richard Thompson. So I suggest you get along and listen to it. Now, I will be including lyric sheets for the songs on the video, so you can have a good read of those. Hopefully a link to the album on YouTube as well, so you can check out the actual music. I can't put it on here, of course, because of copyright. And I just want to emphasize that, these type of videos, are going to be cut and streamlined a little bit later in the year. So I won't be covering all tracks in future videos. But this one I had in the sort of pipeline, so to speak. So you've got a full repertoire of comment on the tracks. So that's about it. Look forward to the next video. And if you haven't as yet, subscribe and hit that notification button. I really want to get this channel moving this year and touch more people. And any requests and comments, please, I would welcome them.